disabilities, learning disabilities, have both internalizing and externalizing behaviors. It's very traumatic for kids to be, because as a species, we need some support those first few years. So the very low warmth, very low demands, not a good outcome. That's the average. But, now to the question from a couple of minutes ago, is this always true? Are there moderators? Are there other variables you put in the equation, and different positionings on those variables might change those relations we just talked about? So, very important study. We'll mention this again in a few weeks when we talk about conduct problems in kids. Greg Pettit, John Bates, Ken Dodge did a study about 20 years ago in Nashville and Indianapolis, I think in North Carolina. Fairly lower middle class, mainly white, about a third African American, and they went in the homes and did real assessments of parenting styles at age 4 years. And they got temperament variables, and they got cognitive variables. This is a big study. And they followed the kids up 6 years later, and then they followed the kids up again. One of the main findings was what? We're going to go back to our grid. Authoritarian parenting at age 4 was a fairly strong predictor of teacher-reported aggression at age 10. These kids are starting to rebel, right? But what was the moderator? Race and ethnicity. This was really strong, this relationship, in white families. The more authoritarian the parents had been at age 4, the more aggressive the kid was at age 10, by the teacher's report. Again, somebody else, or an observation in the classroom. But in black families, the correlation went slightly the other way. The more authoritarian the parents, the less aggressive the kid was, mainly boys. Now, it wasn't a very strong negative relationship. It was almost zero. But there was a big difference. So that's what a moderator is. At the different levels of ethnicity, white versus black, very different pattern of association between authoritarian parenting at 4, aggressive behavior at school 6 years later. Now, here's something I'm going to say before we take questions on this. It was really important that in this study, out of authoritarian parents, during these 4-year-old assessments, some of the families, about 1 in 5, the researchers had to report for physical abuse. This wasn't just authoritarian parenting. This was hitting and slapping, hurting kids. If authoritarian parenting went into the abuse category, that predicted severe aggression 6 years later equally for white and black families. No moderation there. But short of abuse, the stricter parents, you could say that was a risk factor for white kids, but a slight protective factor for black kids. Any ideas why that might have been the case? Yes? Maybe the parents are being appropriately protective. They're setting a lot of limits because it's a dangerous neighborhood. Potential interesting answer. Not all the families did, but that could be. In fact, yes, this takes into account social class, because that could be spurious. Maybe it was really the poverty and not the race, so they took that into account. Another potential moderator, but it turned out to be not as strong a moderator as race. So good question. Who else? Any ideas here? I mean, this is a hard one. One thought, yeah, right here. So maybe we're going back to reciprocal models. Maybe the parents of the 4-year-olds were very sensitive in the African American community. The kid were even a little bit externalizing. They're clamping down hard to prevent labeling effects later. So was it the parenting effect or was it the parents' responsiveness to the child's temperament? This is why you'd have to do it even harder in home study. Another view espoused by Pettit and Bates and Dodge, let's go back to that slide, is, and others have picked up on this interesting finding, what was the norm not so many generations ago in the United States? What did African American parents need to do? They need to watch their kid get sold into slavery. You're preparing your kid for a very harsh environment. So authoritarian parenting is because you're not even going to be their parent once the auction has been held. So this is the sort of cultural norm that you have to do it carried across generations. And given that that norm is there probably is overall more authoritarianness in black and white families today. So if you're a white kid being raised by a very authoritarian set of parents, that's pretty atypical. You may really respond to that. But in a black family, it's like, well, this is what I'm getting shown the respect by mom and dad because they're treating me strictly like everybody else. Maybe it's the way the kid interprets it. So when you find a moderator like this, what's the idea? There may be a lot of mediators that could explain it. But those are hard to measure. That's why you have to do another round of research. Question here. So SES turned out to be spurious in this, but race didn't turn out to be spurious because it was a pretty strong, the white families, this was a strong link between authoritarianness and aggression 6 years later. And just the opposite, although not very strongly the opposite, but not that same pattern in black families. Could be about culture, but what does culture mean? So those might be the processes that are mediating. Going back. Yeah, maybe the teachers are just rating black kids as worse, but they didn't rate the black kids differentially worse who'd come from authoritarian versus authoritative homes 6 years earlier. So there always may be teacher bias in the rating, but if so, why didn't it apply to all the black kids in the study? So these are the things you have to do when you interpret research. You've got to take into account the about 500,000 things that could have also explained the results. Makes it fun, makes it difficult. So we're talking a little bit here about directionality. Authoritative parenting on average predicts better outcomes in kids. Authoritarian parenting on average predicts aggression, but moderated by race. Permissive parenting could go either way. What's the assumption? What's the assumption from the 1950s? Parents, shared environments of parenting, how high you are on those scales matter. They predict and cause the kid outcomes. Or maybe, as this good comment a few minutes ago here, maybe parents are responding really early on to their kid's temperament. Holy God, this kid's active. What do I do now? Or, boy, this little one, our third one, is so inhibited and shy, we're going to have to draw him out. Does parenting cause kids' behavior, or does kids' behavior, especially temperament, cause parents to react differently? How would we figure this out? Take a bunch of kids from Alta Bates Hospital and randomly assign them to live in different homes for the next 15 years. We can do the experiment. Anyone want to join my lab? A big problem with ethics. We can't randomly assign kids to different households. Most kids live with their biological parents. So what comes into play? Gene, environment, correlation. Did we talk about that? Is it the effect of parenting that causes the kid outcome? Does the early kid behavior cause the parents to affect differently? Or is it the shared genes between parents and kids that's actually the genetics there are predicting both the parent behavior and the child behavior? And how do you sort that out? You either randomly assign or you do twin and adoption studies. Most studies don't do that. So most studies say parents cause kids' behavior, but this directionality is a big thing. Maybe the parents are reacting to their kids' behavior. Now, Litton et al. 24 years ago did a really interesting study. For a day, they randomly assigned. They got families of kids who were, these are boys who were really aggressive. They had a diagnosis of conduct disorder. So they got families of boys with conduct disorder and families of boys without, and for a day in the clinic, they did a swap. So the parents would spend a half hour being videotaped with their own kid, or with an aggressive kid from somebody else's family, or a non-aggressive kid from somebody else's family. What was the main finding? We could spend all day. It's a very important study. All parents got much more controlling and authoritarian when they interacted with an aggressive kid. These kids drove them crazy. The kids were trash in the playroom. And the parents would say, oh my God, what's this kid doing? Sit down! We'll be sued. So parents react to this behavior. Interestingly, what group of parents showed the most negativity in the study? The biological parents of conduct disordered kids interacting with their own kids. Because they've got a history there. They've been reacting to their kids' behavior, and they've been setting the stage for their kids' behavior. They're already in a spiral. So it's probably both gene-environment correlation and its modeling and its response. But even parents of pretty healthy boys interacting with those boys of the conduct disordered parents with the conduct disordered kids, they change their parenting pretty radically in response. So parenting it's not all from parents down. It may go from child up, and that can spiral over time. And then what do we have? A transaction. Which caused which? The second the kid was born, did you get an impression? What about the kid's temperament at 4 months? Does your parenting style outweigh that temperament? Is there a good fit? This is a complicated story. Why have we changed from the 1940s and 50s and 60s? Why did we think back then that parenting was the important influence that caused everything? Because psychodynamic, psychoanalytic models that was their heyday in the United States. Parenting is the only thing that matters. We didn't have any idea from twin and adoption studies of heritability, and we didn't think temperament existed. So these ideas just didn't even happen. We had no idea, again, that gene-environment correlation could occur, that it's genes that might actually be explaining the similarity, not how the parent the child. No one really studied peer groups very much back then. So things have changed a lot in the last 50 years. So there's a question or two, but let's just do a quick review. So let's say we're talking about bad outcomes in kids. It could be internalizing, it could be externalizing. And we're looking at parenting 10 years earlier, parents of 6-year-olds. Is parenting a risk factor? Well, it happened before the bad outcome in the teen years, and it predicts it, so yes. Is it malleable? Can you change parents' parenting style? Yes, you can. This is what a lot of family therapists do. Now the question is, can you change it consistently and persistently? Will parents slip back? Depending on the study you read, parents can actually fairly dramatically and long-term change their style. So it's a malleable risk factor. Is it spurious, though? So given what we just spent the last 5 minutes talking about, if it's not really that the parents caused the kid's outcome, but the parents were responding to the kid's early behavior, and the kid's early behavior is the predictor, or if it's the genes that are shared, then parenting is kind of going along for the ride. It looks like a risk factor, but the genes are the risk factor. Or the kid's temperament's the risk factor. So maybe parenting could be a spurious risk factor. Is parenting a causal risk factor if it's not spurious? How would you know? This is where treatment studies come in. You take a group of kids with very severe aggressive conduct problems at age 5 and 6, and you randomly assign 100 families to get very behavioral parent management and 100 families to get a different form of therapy or just read books about it, and you see that the behavioral parent training actually changes the parent's behavior, and it changes the kid's behavior, and you don't find that relation in the control group, and you find that the more the parents change their behavior, the more the kid's behavior changes. Now we're starting to think about causation. Because the only random assignment we can do is to treatment conditions, not to placing kids in certain homes. Questions about this? Yes? So, this is a really good point. What if you do believe in temperament, and the 3 kids in a family are really different? Should parents be really consistent across all of them, or should the parents kind of fit, remember the temperamental fit, should they adapt their styles to Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? Maybe they should. The theorists are not clear on what's the right thing to do. My own belief is you have to have some values you hold to as a parent and some adaptation, but I don't know if that's true or not. So it's a really good point. What do we want to say from this slide? Remember, we don't find shared environmental effects as being very strong. So if you believe, as we believed 50, 60 years ago, that authoritative and authoritarian and permissive and indulgent parenting, not indulgent, but uninvolved, neglectful parenting, are the causal factors, the evidence is genes actually matter more for kids' later behavior, and non-shared environments matter more. How the parent does parent each kid differently. So maybe you're right. But what's the exception to that? What's the class of behavior for which shared environment plays a big role? Externalizing aggressive behavior. So there may be authoritarian or permissive things there that happen. Stay tuned, stay awake for a couple minutes, and this will become clear. And as we'll start to talk about next time, maybe it's not just parenting, it's the peer group, it's the neighborhood, it's the school, etc. Question? What about divorce? Well, that used to be thought, well, that's the risk factor. It's bad for kids, and kids get worse. However, some studies have shown that what usually predicts divorce? A lot of parent argument and conflict. And if you take that into account, often divorce leads to improvement in kids if you reduce the conflict. Of course, post-divorce, if the parents are still arguing about custody, doesn't go so well. So the question is it divorce that's the causal risk factor, or is it the conditions of a bad marriage that leads to the divorce? And most research would say divorce is probably not a great thing for kids, but it might actually be helpful if it stops some of the conflict. So we're going to talk about a couple of other things. We mentioned this before. Maybe it's not authoritativeness and authoritarianism, it's a consistency. Oh man, dad will let me get away with murder. Now, don't go to mom if I need to see friends late. But mom's a little easier on the wallet than dad is on the pocketbook, right? So who do you go to for what? How consistent are parents? So there's a big literature about 2 types of consistency. Am I consistent with my kid? Oh yeah, I'm really tough today, but tomorrow I give in, kind of a patsy. Or am I consistent with my partner? And both within parent inconsistency, tough one day, easy the next, and across parent inconsistency tend to be risk factors. Now here's another aspect of parenting. It's called monitoring. We mentioned this a couple lectures ago. It's 11 p.m. Where's your child? It's February 2014. Do you remember that you have a 14-year-old, right? Monitoring can be, do you know specifically, or if you kind of, at a much more global level, have you forgotten about certain kids? What is monitoring linked to? It's linked to awareness of where your kid is in the neighborhood, with peers, what activities he or she's into. Monitoring typically gets lower. You've got to monitor a 4-year-old a lot more than a 10-year-old, and a lot more 10-year-old than a 16-year-old. But if monitoring falls off too fast, it's associated with what? Externalizing behavior and delinquency. But again, is it the low monitoring that predicts, or are some kids hard to monitor? Screw you, up yours. I'm not telling you where I'm going. And the parents give up on monitoring. So it's always bidirectional. There's some interesting studies in the last 10 years that look at how kids behave. Some kids make it easy to monitor them. Some kids are very hard to monitor. We're not going to talk about this one, but if you have ever taken Psych 140 or you're interested in young kids' cognitive development, there's something called scaffolding. What's the idea here? Kids working on something, a math problem, a puzzle, and the parent, like you're scaffolding a building, you got a little structure that you help, and just when the kid, you see, boy, the kid didn't get this, and when the kid's about to get it himself, you back off. So the parents have to be attuned to when to provide help and when to let the kid solve it. Coercion. We're going to say 2 things about this and finish it up next time. Jerry Patterson is a psychologist up at Oregon, taught at the University of Oregon, founded his own social learning center. He is a behaviorist. He's also very interested in temperament. He's very interested in social class and culture, who did all his work through home observations. He didn't like no friggin' parent self-report scales. He observed behavior in the clinic at home. And he would take, among his many studies, 4-, 5-, and 6-year-old boys with a lot of trouble. They were high in externalizing already. And he would both observe and then do treatment. And through his observations, he found an interesting pattern called coercion. So here's the 30-second version, and we'll pick up on it next time. What's negative reinforcement from Psych 1? Remember? The seatbelt buzzer, when cars had those. Open that door, God, that's annoying. How do you get it to shut off? Click your seatbelt. Or, of course, you unhook the buzzer. You're not supposed to do that. That's antisocial. So you click on your seatbelt, and what happens? The noise stops. Why is that called negative reinforcement? You've got an aversive stimulus, and you shut it up by doing a behavior that's desired. What does that have to do with antisocial behavior in boys? Think of a kid who's, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to tease sister. Screw you, mom and dad. It's annoying. How do you get the kid to shut up? Smack. The kid will shut up. That annoying kid behavior will shut up contingent upon what? The swat. What got reinforced? Swatting. Next time, we'll talk about the other half of the coercive cycle, and there'll be some interesting implications. See you then.